Hello, everyone. I'm Garrett, and thank you for joining. Today's presentation and discussion by PRAXIS3 Principal Brian Tanner and Georgia Tech's Alison Valk will focus on leveraging technology relative to the concepts of active learning, flipped classrooms, and distance learning. This is our third of a six-part webinar series on the future of research libraries. Alison is the instructional coordinator and multimedia librarian for the Georgia Tech Library. She teaches approximately 100 workshops a year on professional multimedia software, oversees the development of the Georgia Tech Library's educational curriculum, leads specialized educational programs that integrate arts-based projects and library resources into the curriculum, and also teaches a computational media research section focused on virtual reality for teaching and learning. We appreciate the opportunity to answer any questions you may have following today's discussion. Those questions can be submitted throughout the presentation by using the dialog box on the right-hand side of your screen. With that, I'll turn it over to Brian and Alison to get us started.
Great, thanks Garrett, and thank you all for being here. We're very excited to have Alison to join us today. We're going to talk about the presentation, as Garrett said, is called Flip the Script. We're going to talk about how we're using technology and how the Georgia Tech Library's teaching studio is putting tools in the hands of instructors and teachers to use in their classroom for new forms of learning. The agenda for today, we'll have some introductory information about the project. We're going to talk about teaching and learning developments over the past 15 or 20 years, things that all instructors are incorporating into their coursework these days. And we're also going to then look specifically at the teaching studio, and I'm going to talk about it kind of from a design standpoint, from an architecture standpoint, and then during our discussion, Alison is going to talk to us more from a library services and instruction and teaching and learning standpoint, which will be the main part of our talk today. Giving credit where credit is due. This is the Georgia Tech Library is a state project, so the Georgia Board of Regents and GSFIC are responsible for bringing this project to reality. The using agency is Georgia Tech generally, and the Georgia Tech Library more specifically. The architecture team was led by BNIM with PRAXIS3. And the library engaged with bright spot strategies to help them with the visioning process that led eventually to the program for the renovation of the library. And the teaching studio was one of the core aspects that came out of that visioning process. So it's really exciting for me to see that 7 years ago when we started working on this thing, to see it come all the way through. Alison and I are both some of the few people that were actually involved in this project from the start, and we're all still here. So, as I said, Alison Valk and Brian Tanner, we are the panelists today. So let's jump right in. Teaching and learning in the information age. So to know what we're doing today and most recently, it's instructive to think about what we did in the past. Traditional learning environments, traditional classrooms generally are characterized by rows of seats, grids of seats, a media wall, in this case, a very low-tech media wall consisting of chalkboard and chalk, a podium or desk that the teacher sits at. And I guess the core dynamic is one of the teacher doing lectures, students listening and taking notes, doing homework, preparing for exams, and we're all familiar with that mode of classroom activity since we were in elementary school. There have been technological developments throughout the years that changed the classroom environment. The introduction of stadium seating or theater seating has made it possible to do much larger classes, especially in colleges and universities. The use of amplification and projection and all of those things allowed for larger and larger groups of people to experience this, but you're still very much in the dynamic of performer and audience. So this is a passive mode for instruction. This is despite the efforts on the part of instructors to be as charismatic as they possibly can and excite the students and make the experience as active as possible. But again, when it's a one-way conversation, it's a little bit difficult to make that happen. So when we move to active learning, we're trying to break some of that apart. And Alison, when you say that kind of configuring the room is one of the key ways that we try to create a more active approach?
Definitely, I kind of think encouraging collaboration in different ways and the sharing of information is really a key part of it.
Yeah, so you see here, these are groups of people working around tables. This looks more like a cafe than it does a classroom in a lot of ways. We also, if anyone who's been to a board meeting where the leader of the meeting is sitting at the head of a rectangular table understands there's a very much a certain kind of power dynamic that gets developed there. One of the ways that we try to configure active learning spaces that has to have round tables, or at least places where groups of people can have a more democratic relationship to one another power-wise. And then speaking of power, the introduction of devices, microphones, and places where people can plug in devices so that you can expand the types of activities that can happen in these active learning environments. We'll talk a lot about that later today. And one form of active learning is called project-based learning, and this involves Alison, I think, translating a curriculum from a lecture-based curriculum into one that you use projects to achieve the learning.
Yeah, and that's actually a model that I work with quite a bit in terms of integrating technology into course assignments. The students are often collaboratively working to accomplish a particular project that utilizes technology for technical communication in some way. And that model, that educational model also, I think it's sort of in our, at least at Georgia Tech, it kind of lends itself to moving away from that sage on the stage model where everyone is sharing information. For instance, in some of my classes, I have the students project their work to the front of the class and share their knowledge base. And so it's this kind of hive mind idea, which I really enjoy.
Great. So you can see also it's technology of the high and low variety, the buckets of toys and things that people are using at these tables. These projects can take on all different kinds of requirements, and sometimes there are spatial requirements that go along with all those as well. People like myself and Garrett, who come from design backgrounds, are used to a studio environment in a lot of ways. Fine art studios, engineering shops, and design studios are really the original project-based learning environments. We're used to that sort of activity, and here you see a design studio in which a desk crit is happening. And really, when we talk about project-based learning, we're talking about injecting desk crits into the teaching model. Here you see students building I'm not quite sure what they're building, but they're definitely collaborating, and they seem to be having a good time, and it's certainly an active engagement with the work there. So for the past 15 or 20 years or so, the idea of flipping classrooms or using a flipped classroom has emerged. And what that involves is taking the part that used to happen in a traditional classroom, the lecture, sending it out of the classroom by using digital media, videos, and other kinds of recordings so that the time within the classroom can be used for one-on-one instruction, some of this desk crit mentality. Is that right, Alison? Is that a good way to describe a flipped classroom?
Yeah. Yes.
Looks like here it looks like a game. I think a game is being played in this particular room where the numbers at the tables, they're competing with each other to do certain kinds of engagement with the coursework. And you can see there's definitely, the teacher is not standing in front of the class. They are out in the middle of the room engaging with all of the teams. And then the students themselves would be experiencing the coursework, the lectures at their own pace, in their own space, and on their own time. And it's really felt that they can absorb that material that way and make better use of the time within the classroom. Of course, this means that in addition, for instructors, in addition to being experts in their subject area and able to give lectures in this, and now they have to be a media company and produce their own content, not unlike we are doing here today with a webinar, which is not exactly what I got into architecture to do. So it's funny, we're kind of all rolling around in this same sort of environment. But that's really what the teaching studio is kind of set up to do, is to help instructors with that sort of thing, right?
Yeah. I think the idea too is, just sort of bringing as many people into the curriculum development process as possible, rather than sort of the onus being on the instructor to do everything and plan everything. I think it's to bring, a number of people into that, such as librarians and technologists and educational specialists.
Excellent. So another component of kind of media enhanced or this type of loosely related to flipped classrooms, something that's been around even longer is distant learning. And it's not exactly the same as what we've been talking about up to this point, but it allows people in multiple locations to experience the same classroom environment at the same time. So in addition to pushing video out to a group of people, you're trying to capture it and broadcast it and share it all at the same time. This involves additional technologies that universities have been using for a long time, but which probably take on a whole new emphasis in the COVID era, I would imagine, this idea of us all working distantly from one another. So here you see a large group in the classroom. In the monitor on the right, you see a smaller group in another classroom. And then on the left, you see some images of some other individuals that are all experiencing the same learning environment at the same time. And then we're all very familiar with the Zoom grid or the totally online classroom collaborative environment. And that's yet another sort of layer on which we're going to have to work. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the discussion part with Alison. So really, that's a quick overview of kind of where the teaching and learning at this point in time. We wanted now to take a quick sort of tour through the teaching studio complex within the library, and then we'll talk more about how it works with Alison after. This is the Georgia Tech Library, and specifically this is the Price Gilbert building. This is one of two buildings, and actually three if you count the Clough Undergraduate Learning Commons as part of the library complex. Most of the teaching studio is located inside this building, so we're going to focus on this building in our discussion today. Just to orient everybody, the diagram you see is of the ground level, which will be the main level of the library, the main sort of hub of activity. This is where the circulation desk or info desk, if you saw our webinar last month, we talked about the new concept for library services that the Georgia Tech Library has implemented. That would take place on this level. On the left, you see Crosland Tower. On the right is the Price Gilbert building that we'll be looking at today. And then off the screen to the right would be the Clough Undergraduate Learning Commons. And we're kind of creating a super highway connecting all three of those facilities at this level. Moving up to the plaza level, this was historically the first floor or main level of the library. The yellow building on the right is the Price Gilbert building. Its main activity here is a large two-story reading room. That's a glorious mid-century modernist space that we've tried to renovate. And along with it, the Scholars Event Network, which is going to be the subject of a future webinar, I believe. Moving up to the second floor, you have collaborative areas that overlook the double-story reading room below and continuation of the Scholars Event Network. On the third floor, you kind of have a repeat of the first level, another reading room, but more heavily oriented towards computing. And along the southern edge of the building, which is going to include some program areas that we'll talk about in a little more detail later. And then the fourth floor, which is the top level of the Price Gilbert building, is where the teaching studio is located. And if we zoom into that, you see that toward the bottom of your screen, you have collaboration areas that overlook the reading room below, but along the entire length of the building, along the part of the building toward the top of the screen is where the teaching studio is located. That's the area in the green and blue that you see right there. The building is kind of organized so that loud and active areas are on the lower floors, and as you ascend vertically through the building, you're getting to more quiet study areas. And we were really trying to create a safe space, a quiet sort of refuge for faculty to have a home in the library where they could go and learn and develop and experiment, as Alison will talk about a little bit later. So here's the floor plan of the fourth floor where the teaching studio is located. Here you see the kind of teaching studio. This is where library faculty will meet with Georgia Tech faculty, so professors, PhD candidates, and graduate students who are all doing instruction. There's some collaboration areas, consultation areas where they will consult and help them develop ideas to employ in their classes. There's a faculty research zone, which is sort of a workshop where they can use the media, use the computing power of the library to develop new forms of content. And then a capture studio where they can actually create digital content in the library and experiment with creating videos for use in flipped classrooms. One level below are some related program areas, as we talked about earlier. On the left side, you see an audio video studio. So this is open not only to faculty, but to the entire Georgia Tech community. This is a higher powered capture area for video and audio with a control room that controls both. But this can be used in conjunction with the capture studio that we saw above. An editing room, which allows for post-production to be done for digital content that's created. And then a multimedia studio where really in-depth collaboration can happen between faculty like Alison and the people that are creating the content. And then another multimedia studio where the high-powered computers and access to the library's proprietary software that allows people to do things that they couldn't really do anywhere else but at the library. So that's kind of an overview architecturally of what the teaching studio is. So thought we would move on into a discussion area, and I'm going to send us back to the floor plan so we can know what we're talking about when we talk about it. But Alison, I mean, the teaching studio is a really innovative program for any library in anywhere. What's the most exciting aspect of this for you?
Well, for me personally, it's kind of the opportunity to collaborate with faculty on campus. I mean, I've always been sort of a proactive person. I like getting out there and partnering with people. So that's kind of, I think, easy for me in some respects. But I think traditionally libraries have been very reactive, like they've waited for people to come to them, the traditional library architecture and the way the services are designed. But I think this new design and the new building is going to foster more of an opportunity for the, I guess, for librarians to partner with faculty and introduce them to new technologies. Sort of like I was mentioning earlier, I kind of feel like traditionally the onus has been on the faculty to develop their courses, design the syllabus, that kind of thing. I think the Teaching Studio presents a space where we can develop programming where people come together to work on that. And sort of introduce them to new technologies that they can use to develop digital learning objects for their classes. So the capture space, you know, presents us an opportunity for, you know, maybe faculty who haven't worked with a green screen before to create digital presentations for their classes in that space. And maybe once they get familiar with some of these kind of entry-level technologies, they can step down and maybe go down to the Media Scholarship Commons, the other area you were showing us, where they learn a little bit more about some of these more advanced technologies and produce you know, digital artifacts that way. And if they're kind of familiar with those technologies, they're more inclined to kind of impart that knowledge onto their students too, where their students come in and are maybe less intimidated by some of the technologies.
So I remember there were various stakeholder groups that were involved as we were working through programming and design. Were the faculty involved in helping to sort of conceive of the teaching studio?
Yeah, and that's, yeah, I just think that it's going to be a wonderful opportunity for partnerships. The Center for Teaching and Learning on the Georgia Tech campus is going to be involved. We're probably going to do some joint programming, and we've already done some pilot programming. We ran a session for faculty on how to design video-based projects for your students. And the cool thing was, you know, video is a medium that it can translate into any discipline. So, you know, we had faculty from the business department and then faculty from biology, and they all had a different need for video. And so we had this nice wide variety of faculty who attended. But yes, it was a combination of me and a faculty member who had already used video in their class. And then we also had some representation from the Center for Teaching and Learning in terms of, you know, what educational models would fit best for these particular types of projects. But it worked out really well, and I'm hoping we'll do more of that sort of programming in the future.
Great. Do you think they're generally receptive to using this? Well, I guess we won't know until the library really opens for real in a few weeks here, but
we've got a lot of inquiries, about it. People are anxious to use it, and so yeah, when we open in the fall, I'm hoping we'll, even though COVID's in place, maybe that might affect it a little bit, but hopefully we'll get some people wanting to utilize it.
So, and I talked about this a lot during the portions when I was talking earlier. When architects and designers confront these different kinds of learning environments, we tend to focus on the physical things, the reconfiguration of the tables and the chairs and the media, the devices and all of those sorts of things. What are the things that designers often fail to think about when we talk about active learning, or we talk about distance learning, or we talk about flipped classrooms? What are maybe some of the more pedagogical things that we may not quite think about?
I think just in general, I think maybe before, I think designing programming sometimes comes into the discussion a little bit later than it should. And maybe, obviously there's some high level discussions that happen when, designing is getting ready to happen. But I think maybe a deeper dive into programming would kind of help in some ways. Because I really do feel like you can have a great space, but the space is only as good as the programming in it. And so I think that sort of bringing that aspect of it into the planning process is always a good idea.
So as you're developing tools for faculty to use, I suppose you have to integrate with the IT department at the institute and things like that. Is there a direct sort of connection between how those things work in the classrooms, where they're ultimately going to be working, and what you guys are modeling in the studio?
In terms of like our synergies with the IT department,
With the
in other
IT,
words?
yeah.
Yeah, and one thing that's kind of nice about the way we're kind of designing these service spaces is we have service owners, and like I'm the service owner for the teaching studio, but in many of these high tech areas, we've got like teams of people, teams of service owners. So there'll be like a representative from the library and a representative from the IT department, and they've all kind of got sort of, I guess, a stake in it and can bring their knowledge, expertise to the table. So for instance, when I'm working and designing programming that might involve the capture space or one of the video production studios, I'm working hand in hand with Jason Brewer in the IT department, and he's kind of focused on the AV aspect of it, and we can kind of work together. So I can give him what might be a likely use case for this space, and he can say, okay, this is going to be the best technical design for this space given that use case.
Great. You touched on this a little bit earlier, that the teaching studio is really designed to be an in-person experience, so that faculty can come to the teaching studio and really interact in person with you all and kick the tires and really experiment. So I would imagine during the COVID era, you're going to have to be employing the teaching studio in a virtual way, which is really kind of a meta situation of the. How are you dealing with that?
Yeah, a lot of the technologies that we would be sort of introducing people to, we're going to have to be using to introduce them to it. So yeah, it is really meta. But yeah, we're finding that we're going to have to front load a lot more than we expected to. Originally, there was going to be a lot more in-person interactions and in-person events or programming. We're basically just temporarily, until things, maybe get a little bit better, back to normal. We're going to sort of scale back some of the in-person activities, and we're going to move more towards front loading a lot of things. So for instance, I think earlier in the presentation you were showing how faculty and staff can create digital learning objects. We're going to be creating digital learning objects that we share with the faculty ahead of time, and then once they've kind of I guess, read over that or digested that, then we will probably use a lot of web conferencing technologies and some of the things we're using today to sort of have, I guess, do a deeper dive discussion on some of it.
Great. When you are all able to be there, eventually, let's all hope that we're all able to sort of employ more traditional ways of occupying these spaces the way they were really intended to be used from the beginning. What are some of the ways that you imagine training and collaboration happening within the teaching studio?
Well, again, we'd really like to build on some of the pilot programming that we've done. I guess the workshop on integrating video into course assignments was just a start. And we really want to dive into all sorts of different types of technologies, because as we know in today's world, you know, scholarship was traditionally just writing papers or publishing books, but now scholarship is being, you know, distributed in many different ways. Video, audio, you've got all sorts of different types of podcasts. There's all kinds of different media that's being used to distribute scholarly information. And I think what we'd like to do is do a deeper dive on all that. Like perhaps we could do some sort of a workshop on how to, you know, distribute your scholarship or research via audio, or how, you know, how to, you know, we have so many grad students who are also partly teaching, who want to present their research and they want innovative ways to share that information. We could show them tools for designing effective posters for poster sessions. So there's all kinds of workshops and programming that we could design, and I'm really hoping we'll be able to kind of kick off with a suite of workshops once things get back to normal.
Yeah. So is Georgia Tech in a unique situation with regard to these teaching and learning trends we were talking about? I mean, these trends are happening all over the world, and not only at Georgia Tech, but is there anything that's unique about Georgia Tech in this regard?
Well, I kind of feel like in a certain sense, we're very lucky and privileged to have access to so much cutting edge technology because of the researchers that are present at Georgia Tech. So oftentimes, you know, we might get opportunities to, you know, pilot technologies before they're really out in the mainstream. I know, for instance, we've got a few of our colleagues talking to some of the folks who are working with the HoloLens and bringing in some VR technologies that we can pilot. And so, yeah, so I guess in general, access to sort of new technologies before they hit the mainstream is something that we're really lucky to have access to, and we could integrate that into the teaching and learning aspect of the teaching studio.
Yeah, fantastic. Garrett, how are we doing on time? Are we okay?
We are good to go.
All right. When we were chatting the other day, we were talking about kind of the temporary configurations you all had over in Crosland Tower as you were having to do this work in a sort of ad hoc way before the teaching studio was completed. Were there any lessons you all learned kind of through that process that you'll be able to implement going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I guess in some senses, we sort of, when we were trying out some of the technologies, you know, we kind of began to learn what worked and what didn't work. And like, for one thing, we've been trying to find effective ways to track what types of software and technologies people are using when they're logging into some of the labs and areas in the library. And we've been trying to work with, I guess we have a system called the EMS, which is an event management system for reserving space on the campus. And traditionally that's used for reserving just rooms or spaces. And we tried to implement that on a station by station basis so that students would have to reserve a station, and in some ways we could track and see what types of software they were using and for how long and things like that. And that didn't work. I guess in terms of trying to find technology solutions to track how students and faculty are utilizing our spaces has been a challenge, and something that we tried out in Crosland, and we're probably going to try to find a different technology solution for that moving forward.
Great. Garrett, do we have any questions? Yeah.
We've seen some of that on our end, both through door sensors, furniture itself that can be intelligent enough to understand that it's active, just to not only help on the technological side as you're describing, but also to understand which spaces themselves are being most used, or what do we have a greater need for, what could be consolidated, and that type of thing. So that like the world, that data is allowing us to become better designers and to program spaces better for faculty and students as well.
Mm-hmm. Great.
All right.
So Garrett, did we have any questions from, yeah.
We'll receive an email that allow you to download today's presentation and the option to take a short survey. And we appreciate everyone's feedback and be glad to answer any future questions you may have. We hope that you'll join us for the next discussion, which will focus on the collaborative library, or how the library is no longer a place of quiet study, but also a place for dialogue, meeting, and exchange of ideas. Thanks again for joining. We look forward to talking with you again soon. And special thanks to Alison for joining us, and thanks, Brian, for leading us through that conversation this morning.
Yes, thanks. Thanks, Alison.
Thank you.